you know, jerks. So I'm not here, but there should be an email address on the front of handout number 1, and I encourage you that if you've got a question about somebody or what to do next, I'm going to say yes, come to the next talk, but I'm also, you know, I might be able to give you some guidelines, so feel free to email me. Just put in the subject Casa, beginner, and any kind of indicator so I know what talk this is, so I can gear the answer as correctly as I can. But because it's a, you know, I wish I could come here and just hang out here and do my own work until someone needs help. But at the moment, as soon as I retire, we'll rearrange things, you know, which will be forever and ever. Anyway, okay, so when we took our break, we were talking about records and what to, where to find the information. Again, you know, most of us are just not going to have this stuff memorized. You might remember, oh yeah, mom and dad's anniversary, all this stuff. You know, you're going to know your own, but you won't necessarily know your parents. And it's the key to everything when you're doing genealogy research. And again, I'll go back to self-taught idiot. I just grabbed information from anybody I could, put it in the computer, and that was that. And then I'm like, okay. Then I found other people's information on other family trees. So I'd ask them, you know, where did this come from? Well, you know, and they didn't have a good answer to it. I'm like, well, so first off, this is a mistake. This is off by 2 years. This is wrong. So I found out quickly that other people's data is, word begins with C, ends with P. So I'm like, okay, well, what's to say that my data is any better? I know it's better because of where I got it, but I need to document it. So it's the bane of the existence of the entire genealogical community that a whole lot of people have posted family trees everywhere, and they don't always document what they find. So it's okay that maybe the data is right, you got to go hunt down the source yourself if you're finding other people's work, but it's much better to document it. Say, look, I've done my homework. If you've done the homework, show everybody you've done the homework. So it's good to always have these backup things rather than just say, I know my dad was born April 9th of whatever day. That's all well and good, but to Dominic's point at the beginning of this entire presentation, we need to preserve this information for the future, for somebody 50, 100 years from now who wants to try to figure this out. And they'll be like, you won't believe this. Somebody wrote this all down back in 2023. Wow, you know. So if I could run into, hey, somebody wrote this down in 1930, guess what? Nobody did. So we're doing the service to the future. So marriage dates and places. I was telling you the story about my cousins in St. Paul who weren't quite sure, or they were sure enough to ask me, when's mom and dad's 50th anniversary, okay? So, you know, and they're the couple in question were, you know, they were daily communicants, you know, to mass every morning. And so, you know, they literally didn't want to offend their parents by reminding them of a little mistake that might have happened in the beginning. So, but what I find in the Italian records typically is that if you're looking for a marriage dates are kind of the hardest to find. Somebody dies, somebody's born, but when they got married could be kind of any time. So I usually say start with the year the first child is born. If you know, it's like, okay, my grandma is in the middle of 11 kids, and the oldest kid is Uncle Joe, and he was born in 1898. Okay, so I would start with 1898 in the marriages and work my way backward. And typically you'll find it pretty quickly that way. If you start with the kid that's the 5th or the 6th out of 11, you're going to be wasting a lot of time looking in other years. one thing to know about Italian records, this is, I won't say advanced, but this is a little past beginner, is that the records, as I mentioned earlier, are kept by the small town name. They're cataloged by that name. And so when you're looking for them, you don't look under Bari or Palermo or Naples, you look under the name of the little town. And then within those, they're grouped by what type of record they are. Are they a birth, a marriage, or a death? There are other types of records, which we'll talk about in later classes. And then they're grouped by year. So you'll find, okay, Trajano Bari birth records from 1866 to 1900. And they're all in one entry in the catalog that way, okay? So you're going to be like, all right, I want marriages that cover past 1898 because that's when Uncle Joe was born. And then you work your way back, 98, 97, 96, 95. They're under one catalog entry, so you're going to be in what's called a film. I guess this is a good time to talk about the Family History Center and where this stuff's coming from. Why? A very simple question many beginners say is, why is somebody keeping track of Italian records and then making them available for free in the United States? Are they doing us a favor? Kind of by accident. These are records, some of you may know all this already, but these are records that were microfilmed by the Mormon Church, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, of which I am not a member, but I spend way more time in their buildings than I do in my own, okay, because they have records there. My church doesn't. And so the Mormon Church, among their sacraments, is that you get sealed to your forebears, and when you die, then you'll be with them in eternity. That's one of their, we have communion and confirmation, matrimony, last rites. One of theirs is their temple ordinances, they call them. So they want to get as much information microfilmed and available to anybody. The good news is they didn't decide, well, we're only going to allow Mormons to use it. And the good news is they didn't limit themselves to parts of the world that have a heavy Mormon, in other words, basically Utah, Nauvoo, Illinois, they didn't limit it to their own people. Because they know that they have a lot of converts in that church. And so in order for those converts to link up with their ancestors, those ancestors are not necessarily members of the Mormon Church. Okay, so let's say I converted, and then it'd be like, okay, well, my parents are Catholic, my grandparents are Catholic, my great-grandparents are Catholic, on and on and on, okay, Polish and Italian and Irish, and so it's basically Catholic Central. So for me to tie into these people, they got to allow records from those non-Mormon areas to be filmed. So why is it free? Because it's subsidized by the church. Okay, so FamilySearch.org is part of the Mormon Church, but two things to always know. Number one, the website, when you register, will never say, give us a credit card just in case. Some websites will do that, of genealogy or not genealogy. They'll say, okay, well, if you choose to make a purchase, you have your credit card on file. There is no choosing to make a purchase on Family Search. You will never be asked for a credit card or any form of money. And the other very important thing is nobody uses your login or your whatever to say, hey, how about joining our church? You will never, ever, ever, ever be asked that as part of going on this website. People should be, hesitant sometimes about, who you give your name and your phone number to and all this, because you don't know what it's going to be used for. But I can speak from 30 years of experience that no one has ever tried to, I guess the verb is proselytize. No one has ever asked me to, hey, come join us. Don't be afraid. It's never happened, so it won't happen to you. And again, no one's going to ask for money. You just register on the site so that there's a login for you, and then the things that you post on the site, if you put your family tree in there, or records you've already looked for. Your login will act as a record that that's what you did. If you choose to post your family tree on Family Search and do your editing of your tree on Family Search, by logging in, that gives you are the author of the tree and you can change anything you want. If you allow the tree to be seen by other people so that, hey, I can reel in some other people who know my family or who are tied to my family, then they can see it, but they can't change any of it because they can change theirs. They can't change yours. So they've really thought this through, and I mean, they spent years and years, people saying, well, we got to join the internet age, and okay, well, if we do that, what's the point? So before we had an internet, at least cheap internet everywhere, they had this catalog. So you'd go to these places called family history centers, which are usually a tiny, tiny little room in one of the Mormon church buildings. Okay, so when I was still living in the South Side, I think, I don't know that it was Chicago Heights. Wasn't there another one down your direction? Family History Center?
I think there was a Mormon place in Chicago Heights.
Well, there is. I went to one. I don't remember it being Chicago Heights at the time, but I didn't know you yet.
Oh.
I mean, we're way back now. But point is that I went to that, and I didn't know anything, and the catalog was either on a CD-ROM or it was in literally a card catalog. Back, you see things on Facebook now that say this was the old internet, and so we had so the catalog we'd find what was for that area, and then we had to pay money, and they would make a microfilm, and they would send the microfilm from Salt Lake City 6 weeks, 8 weeks later. So you were all ready to work, and now you got to wait 8 weeks. This is the old days. This is not now. So the film would come in, and then you put it on the machine, and the bulb would be out, and all kinds of problems. So it was how anybody did this and didn't quit, I'll never know. Ask anybody I work with or anybody in my family, I'm not known for my patience. And the fact that I've done this for 30 years is a testament, because I don't do anything for 30 years. But breathing, okay, that's a lot longer. I don't have a choice on that one. But they sent the films, and then after a few weeks, the film would be returned back to Salt Lake City. That's how the old system went. And they said, well, everybody needs room for these films. They're paying all this money. We have film people that were paying money to duplicate these films all over the place. They said, let's get rid of all that. Let's put it all on the internet. That means we got to go back and renegotiate all these contracts with all these people that we already went and filmed it. Say, okay, we want to post it on the internet now. Can we do that? And in some cases, they said no. I've got birth records from 1921 to 1929, and I had the microfilms when they were microfilms, and I did a whole bunch of work with them, and then I sent them back, and then all of a sudden FamilySearch.org pops up and says, yes, these are microfilms. You can't see them anymore. And the reason is that the privacy laws changed in Italy, that it's 100 years for a birth record.
Yeah.
So yes. So unfortunately, at least from the point of view of the negotiation, I'm no legal expert. So records that I could see before, that might have been 70 or 75 years at the time. I can't speak for that, but it changed. And so suddenly it's like, yep, here's the steak. You can't have it. We'll tell you how great it is. We just can't let you eat it. So it's it went from these old days of films. So when you get on the catalog on FamilySearch.org today, it will reference films, but they're not films anymore. They just kept whatever was on a roll of film. There might be 20,000 names on a film, depending on, say Italian birth records, probably be about 20,000 on that one film. And the fun part is that some of the films have more than one town on it because they went to the provincial archive to film it. So in Bari, they would start with Acquaviva della Fonte, and they would film Acquaviva della Fonte, and then they get to the end of the last of the Acquaviva della Fonte records and say, okay, now we're going to get the Altamura, and we're going to put that in there, you know. And then when towns would split, suddenly Adelphia is a town, and they'd have to throw that one in. So you end up with multiple towns sometimes on one of these films. And when I go through the Italian civil records in month 3, I get to show you, okay, you're going to run into this. Because I ran into it because I'm a self-taught idiot. I went through the records and I'm like, I'm not finding anybody in here because I was in the wrong town. 2 towns on the film. Sometimes there's more. Somebody here said there were families from Cegli del Campo, which is a very small town, and the next alphabetical town is Cellamare, and those 2 are mixed together all over the place on one film, and if you don't know where you're going, you might look for the wrong people. Okay, parents, you're going to eventually reach a point where you're going to have the name of somebody, and you're not going to know who their parents were. Now, you can do some guessing based on how Italians name their kids. Father has, okay, 2 people get married. They have sons. First son is going to be almost invariably named for the father's father. The first daughter is going to almost invariably be named for the father's mother. And then the second kid is supposed to be named for the mother's father, second son, and the second daughter is supposed to be named for the mother's mother, until you have a duplication. Until dad's dad is Giuseppe and mom's dad is Giuseppe. So guess what? Mom's dad, well, you got grouped in with dad's dad, and they're named for both of you. Trust us, we love you both. Right. So you run into that kind of thing. But if you're going through records and you're like, I have no idea, there are so many Russo families in here, but the oldest son in the family is named Baldassaro. Somebody gave me that name a minute ago. I said, that's a good one. You ain't going to run into that very often. So if he's the oldest son, his pop is probably called Baldassaro. So now you're looking, you at least have something to guess at, as opposed to you will get names that are going to be certainly repeated a lot. You know, if you ask somebody who's not Italian, and you say, oh yeah, name Italian first names, you're going to get a lot of Salvatores, and you're going to get a lot of names of different kinds. And then you go to the individual towns and you find out not a lot of people, you know, the names are very, because they repeat themselves, they're very germane to that local area. Doesn't mean they're unique, but let's just say that in the province of Bari, very few Salvatores. We had one cousin Salvatore, and we're like, where did he come from? How did he pop into it? Who did he? Well, his mother's Sicilian, and her town's loaded with Salvatores. So it just depends where you're from and whose tree you're following. And one other small thing. This is actually for a future presentation, but so you kind of get an idea. If you go to if you find an Italian record the way I'm going to teach you how, just because you find the right name and the right parents does not mean you found the right person. Because one other little trick of naming kids is that when these children died in infancy, frequently the name would be reused. Recycled, yes. So I have one family now. Luckily, again, a rare enough name in Carbonara di Bari, Palmo, not Paolo, Palmo. And Palmo, 1825 Palmo, married Rosa in 1848, Spadavecchia, and they had 5 sons named Palmo and 4 daughters named Rosa. Okay, now, to find the story of your entire family, I will wager a nickel, because it's all I got with me, that your family has there's more kids in these families than anything you might know about. They don't talk about the infants that pass away, even in Chicago, where there might be fewer of them passing away due to the diseases that took the kids from the 1800s and the early 1900s in Italy. So yeah, so this family, the family having 5 Palmos and 4 Rosas is not unique or uncommon. It's not like, oh, this one family had a problem. No, you're going to find out your family had the same problem too. Basically, it was that they did not understand that dirty drinking water led to cholera. You're going to also find out that Italian death certificates do not give you the cause of death. We would love to see that. Why are all the men in our family dropping dead at 55? You'd want to see that they were dropping dead back in Italy. They might have been, but you won't know why. The only time you can really gauge the cause of death from an Italian death record is if there was a baby born to a woman and the woman dies a week later. Okay, it was complications of the childbirth. The baby almost always died too. You know, medical science being garbage back in those days. I mean, there was some what gives us a cold we take an antibiotic for killed these people. And so you're going to find families like this. When I went to Italy, I love telling this story. My great-grandmother's brother's son, he was mayor of our town back in the 70s. By the time we met him, he was in his 80s. So they invited us over. I think we invited ourselves over. Tomato, tomato. And we were there. What are we going to do? Leave without seeing him? So we saw, he was also a professor at the University of Bari. So very, very bright guy. But he didn't speak a word of English, and I spoke precious little Italian. I played charades for the 2 weeks I was there. That's all I could do. So he wants to show me the family history. He's the professor, okay? So he says, 4 figli, 4 kids. Angela, Michele, mio padre, his father. I don't speak Italian, I'm mumbling this, you can, and then Mariana and Orsolina. I say, no 4 figli, 9 figli, 9 kids. And he looked at me, he's telling me stuff, I'm like, yeah, 9 kids. So I had found 5 other kids who died as infants. I showed him the copies of the records. Being a mayor of the town, he would be more than familiar with how they looked. And here they are. And actually, everybody I visited, we gave them a book with all kinds of documents and pictures and all kinds of stuff. And so I got a hernia to this moment from the lifting it to bring it there, and we went home relatively empty-handed because the book stayed there, But so I gave him the stuff, and I gave him the book, and I said, yeah, 9 kids, 9 figli. And then there were twins in there. And he went, I thought he was going to be upset. I didn't know. But that's, my aunt translated, that's where the twins in his progeny came from. He didn't know. He says, so there are twins in our family. And yeah, there they are. Giuseppe and Fioravanti. Okay, so he, all right, thank you, Professor. I'm glad I got your thumbs up. That was a moment for me, really. I wasn't trying to show him up. I was trying to show him the truth. I knew it. So, so you will find that out. And again, so the trick of finding people, if you don't have an exact birth year, is going to be, well, I got to find all the kids for this one family. That's going to be, again, we talk about that in another week, but it's going to be a real, I'll call it a pain, but it's what you need. And you also will find out that, okay, now I understand, okay, these families, okay, why would they have 3 kids over 20 years? It's because they had 11 or 12 in 20 years is what it was, okay? If there's a big gap between years, it means dad might have been over here trying to get some money, make some money, get a job, and left his wife and kids. So, of course, cross the ocean, they weren't creating any children. At least I hope not. Most of the time they didn't. Well, you don't know. So, you're going to also find my great-great-grandfather has no parents. He was left, I don't know if any of you are fans of the TV series MASH, but there's an episode where they leave a baby. And they all take care of the baby, but they go, we got to give the baby up. They can't keep it on a military base. We got to give the baby to the people. So they bring it to a monastery and they put it in this little kind of a dumbwaiter type of thing, put it in there, and then they turn it around and it goes inside because the monks don't want to talk to the outside. Well, that's what happened to some of our ancestors, some of our, it could be. My great-great-grandfather had exactly that situation. And so the monastery then, or maybe it wasn't a monastery in Italy, but they reported the birth. They said, we have a baby here, it's about a year or two old, and we've decided to name it Nicola, and we're going to give it the surname Santo Liquido. Okay, so there are no Santo Liquidos in my town until he shows up. And so that's my one ancestor that I can't go any further back. He's born in 1855. He's in a set of special records, which that's month number 4, advanced topics. They're called atti diversi, diverse acts, papers, whatever. And so it records illegitimate births where no parent is listed on them. If there's one parent listed, it's in the regular births that mama had a baby and they have a phrase that gently says, there's no husband. So, you might trip over that too. I've got people that were born under the name of their mother, surname of the mother, because there's no father listed. And then 3 months later, they have a little add-on to the birth record saying, this woman married this gentleman, and now this baby is legitimate. And then coincidentally, when the baby gets married, it's got the father's surname now. So you're looking for a birth certificate for this name, and they were born under a slightly different surname. You're going to run into this kind of stuff. And it's just, and it's enough to go, well, why can't I find this? I'm right on the right page. I'm right on the right. Well, because of this stuff. So we get into that in the advanced topics. Again, I'm going to say this now. I'm just talking about the different kinds of records to get parents from. If somebody's born in Illinois, Chicago, anywhere else in the U.S., if the birth certificate should have the parents on there, spelling is, as usual. The Italian records, you typically don't have to worry too much about the spelling. You may have trouble reading the handwriting. You may have an O that looks like an A or an A that looks like an O at the end of a name. So somewhere in the birth it mentions the gender, femminile or masculino. You can't mix those two up because they're written in longhand. Prepare for the issue that Italian records are, everything's written in longhand, including numbers. So when they want to say 1872 for the birth year at the top of the record, it's not 1872. It's 1872. Written in longhand, folks. So, again, those of you who have no trouble reading Italian, what's the problem? Good for you. I had to learn it all. I had to bring word lists with me and all that stuff. I don't need them anymore, but I did at that time. Even the number of the record, and I'll show you that on another week, it's record number 82. 82. Wouldn't it be easier to just put the 8 and the 2 there? I suppose from a handwriting standpoint, you have more chances of getting it right when you've got all those letters than a digit. Somebody posted a record this morning while I was waiting to come in, and it said, what year does this say? And it said 1-8, clearly a 5, and some kind of squiggle that no one knows what it is. It's not a 1, it's not a 2. I couldn't turn that squiggle into a record if my life depended on it. Luckily it doesn't. So, you're going to run in, I have this my parent company is in Frankfurt, Germany, and when they write a 1 with a line through it, and when I read the Italian records, they write a 7 with a line, and so you got to recalibrate when you're reading different things. Everybody's got a little bit different, and the handwriting styles change. I've done a couple of commentaries on Fra Noi about that. Yes.
And don't they always put, which sometimes is confusing, if they put the
Month.
month
No, the
and
day,
then
the month.
the
Oh,
date,
yeah.
the month, because if it's like 4 is the day that the person was born, and the month, you have to really look at it. And that's
Yeah,
what they
but
do with all their
December 4th,
documents.
it's 4/12.
You're good if it's 7/7, okay? 7/7, you can't get that one wrong. July 7th of 07 is really sweet, but guess what? Yeah. And the 23rd of April's pretty good too. You can't get a 23rd month. But right, if they do write a date as a date, invariably, day, month, year. And again, luckily, I deal with Germany, and they have everything translated into English when they send me paperwork, but the dates are written in your style. That for some reason they won't budge on that one. Okay, I know what they are. Otherwise I'd freak out. What do you mean that's not due until November of this year? No, it's January 11th. Shut up, you know. So yeah, you're gonna run into that kind of stuff. But I will say this about Italian records in general. The parents, the accuracy of the parents is almost pristine on the birth records and also on the marriage records. Italian death records, well, okay, if somebody died at 88 in 1902 and their parents have long since died, parents might be a little dicey there, even though they name their kids, you know. Even they could figure out, well, that must be mom's mother and father's name. It's the second son and second daughter. Well, sometimes they make mistakes, but for the most part, they're accurate. And I will also say this, that on the marriage records, the ages of the bride and the groom are pristine, wonderful, and accurate. The ages on the death records, you know, I would have been very nervous to turn 65 and 70 and 75, because those were dangerous years for the Italians, because the death records, they're 60, 65, 70, 75, 80, 85. The ages are C blank blank P, okay? So you're gonna run into that too. There's all kinds of, I'm kind of getting ahead of things. Names of parents. If you've applied for a Cook County marriage license, you probably filled out a lot more detail than what you're gonna find when you now write to Cook County or you go on Family Search and say, I need a copy of that license. Because the license just says groom and the bride. Maybe they mentioned something that if the bride is a little bit young, that her father gave permission. I've noticed that in most cases where the bride was too young to get married, no father was involved and the bride was suddenly 18. A lot of that stuff. I mean, not Jerry Lee Lewis stuff, but young, you know. And his second wife was 13, for those who don't remember that news story or whatever. But 13 was an old maid in Louisiana, where he came from, I think. I don't know. But at any rate, yeah. You will occasionally run into a marriage record in Italy where somebody is 14 or 15 and you're going to go, ugh, but okay. Frequently the father is deceased